On May 19, 2006, an estimated 63 people living in a community on the Kentworth farm were found deceased. Considered one of the worst mass suicides in recent history, the events described have yet to receive significant press attention. The following are a series of interviews with various individuals involved in the discovery and subsequent investigation of the Kentworth compound. The first interviewee is Andrew Willard, a tall, gaunt man, 64, with large hands. His almond-shaped eyes peered at me from beneath furrowed brows, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He had been in my office for 15 minutes and had asked to smoke 3 times. Each time I refused, but Mr. Willard continued to hold a cigarette between his fingers, tapping it against my desk, leaving a trail of tobacco flakes. Once my equipment was set up, I asked Mr. Willard to begin recounting his story for the record. Andrew Willard, *. I was about 30 when the Rollins family moved in next to the Kentworth property. Back then, there were only a few of them. We figured they were squatters or nomads or something, but we didn't much care so long as they didn't set up camp on our land. Every now and then, you'd see the youngest of them come into town to buy a few things. As dirty as she was, with rotten teeth and tangled hair, she didn't act like any nomad I'd ever seen. She was quiet and kept her distance. I remember looking at her and thinking that in another life, maybe she'd been quite beautiful. There were always rumors, but I never paid them any mind. We didn't know anything about them, so the gossip was no better than make-believe. Jarvis told me he saw signs of construction on the property, and a lawyer passing through accidentally let slip that the Rollins were the new owners and he was there to work on planning permits. He was a real slick guy, and that was the first time any of us knew that the Rollins were rich. Of course, over time, all that became old news. I didn't much care for them, though I always felt a bit of pity if I saw one of them wandering around town. But mostly, I just didn't trust them, their choice of living, or why they lived such solitary lives. If you act secretive, people will naturally assume you have secrets. Of course, I didn't have a goddamn clue how bad things actually were. They had been living there for almost 20 years when that car came tearing down the end of my road. I could hear it from a mile away. The tires popped and slammed against the asphalt while the front bumper screamed a terrible shriek, half dragged beneath the radiator. And I just remember thinking something awful had happened. The sound seeped into my skin like fingernails on a chalkboard. I didn't know what it was, only that it was bad and it was coming for me. It stopped right outside my house. That was the strangest thing, as if someone had slammed on the brakes at just the right moment to get my attention. I tried to tell the cops there that the handbrake was pulled up when I got to it, and that was a pretty peculiar thing to notice. But they didn't seem to think so. And I've spent a lot of time since wondering if I might have accidentally pulled it up without realizing. God, I don't remember much about what I saw in that thing, at least not in any pleasant way. It's still there, jumbled in my head. What I saw, smelled, and heard. I feel it when I sleep, or sometimes even when I just close my eyes. I'll sit there and blink half a second too long, and then boom. I can see those 3 girls sitting together, all naked and dismembered. And I can hear the bluebottle flies crawling around their navels. And I can smell the fear they defecated, and the way their muscles were turning into a mush of congealed fat beneath their skin. That car burst out of the woods with a little piece of hell trapped inside, and I had the misfortune of seeing it. I think about it every day, every night. I think about the handbrake pulled bolt upright. I think about the slight curve in the road, and I wonder if a car could truly roll that far on its own. And I think about those girls, I think about them a lot. I guess I can't help but wonder what they went through. Why were they soiled? Why was their mascara streaked with tears? And most importantly, why were they grinning? God, can I smoke? No. Dr. Osley is a sad-looking man in his 60s. He had spent the last few years battling a prescription pill addiction and retired 6 months ago to avoid having his medical license revoked. We met for coffee at a small diner a few hundred feet from the rehab clinic where he has been living for the past 10 weeks. He has droopy gray eyes, a plump face, and short fingers that constantly scratch his jaw, neck, and shoulders. Dr. Osley, *. No one's ever interviewed me before. I was only a student then, not a doctor or a forensics expert or anyone people usually think of asking in times like that. But I was there. I was in the small bus as we drove past the rattling chain-link fences and corrugated iron shacks. I stood on the ground and looked up at the amber windowed spire of the Kentworth mansion. watching the smashed bins with fires still burning inside them, seeing rats as big as cats fleeing through the rubbish scattered across the muddy, grassless yard. And right outside the front door were 13 bodies laid out in neat rows. They brought some of us in to help with the cleanup, and we continued to find 38 more hidden within the main house. Even in the middle of a full-blown investigation, everyone was just quiet. Cops, doctors, paramedics, you might expect that from a bunch of final-year med students, but not from those guys, right? They're in the middle of stuff like that every day. But no one was joking or chatting, just short nods and tense orders given in gasps. I wouldn't go so far as to say my time with the Rollins was the cause of where I am now, but it certainly didn't help. There were 5 of us, but they had built the place into something ridiculous. They'd added 2 new floors and probably about 4 or 5 other rooms through various outhouses. And that's not even counting the ramshackle portable cabins they'd set up as classrooms, dorms, and so on. Dozens of them. It took days to clear out each room, looking for bodies just to be sure, and all that time I was there, right in the thick of it all. And the bodies, they were all grinning. I asked about it, and I hoped to get some nonchalant answer like, "Oh, it's nothing, just get on with it, it's just rigor mortis." But the man I asked just shook his head and put a hand on my shoulder. And that somehow felt worse. As if no one had an answer, no one could comfort me or tell me to just get through it. I wanted to be told my fear was irrational, but no one could do it. All those bodies had been horribly mutilated. Some were hiding in fear. Others were lying down as if napping. The official ruling was poisoning or some kind of hallucinogenic episode. But almost everyone I saw was cut up in truly disgusting ways. There were strips of skin peeled off, eyeballs gouged out, scalps hanging like dustbin lids. One woman had cut her throat so deeply she'd almost decapitated herself. For others, it was unclear if they'd done it to themselves or if someone else had. Clearly, a lot of them were trying to escape from something or someone. But I can't imagine how a random attacker could clear out a building with so many people without being overwhelmed. The Rollins family wasn't naive. They had some big guys around who weren't helpless. The first few days there were a lot of people around, but once they calculated how long the job would take, they soon found ways to disappear. At one point, I was left alone in that place, and I'm not sure I've had a decent night's sleep since. The worst I got was when we were still clearing out the main hall. There were 23 bodies there to begin with, and my buddy and I had to move them out and start cleaning. And at some point near the end of the day, my friend went to the toilet, and I was left alone with every one of those bodies. The fact that most of them were already bagged didn't really help. If anything, I found it worse. I started getting images in my head of one of them slowly sitting up, like vampires in those old horror movies, except there was nothing cheap and low budget about the picture in my mind. Somewhere on the front wall, a clock was ticking. The kind you'd have in a classroom, and I looked at the lecture stand and the benches and the ping-pong table folded up in a corner. That's where people lived. God, whatever they were doing, they were just asterisk living. That guy whose bag I was zipping up. That guy with the bloodshot eyes that wouldn't close and the blue lips swollen with his tongue half-bitten between his teeth. He used to sit on those benches and stare at that clock. And something about that just scared me to death. I decided to go outside and find anyone. God, they'd understand, right? They'd understand why a young guy like me might be a little scared. I stood up and started walking towards the door when I heard a noise. I didn't even look back. I couldn't. I just ran straight and I let out a little noise too. A thing left behind as I ran through the doorway like I was being electrocuted. My muscles contracted like springs, my scalp went ice cold and seemed to shrink around my skull. And all I could think was that things like this shouldn't happen. I was panicked, that's all. That's why I wanted to leave. It was a feeling, not something really real. Sure, the image of one of those bags sitting up had been playing in my head for the last few minutes, but it was like a joke. It was a delusion, a game I was playing with myself. It wasn't meant to be real, it wasn't meant to be anything more than a thought. But I heard it so clearly that I could have sworn the clock held its breath just to make sure I noticed. It started as a rustle heard somewhere behind me, a seamless sound that became the crunching of plastic, followed by the chilling sound of a zipper being pulled. Mr. Well, built like a linebacker, struggled to fit into the chair I'd placed opposite my desk. He wore a dark brown herringbone mayor's suit, finely stitched. He requested to compare watches, but I refused and instead asked him to verbally recount what we had discussed earlier on the phone. Clearly chastised, he agreed. Mr. Well, asterisk. We recovered a ton of documents, mostly boring stuff, accounting stuff related to the scams he was involved in. He loved gambling, horse racing, and stocks. And apparently, he had a whole system because it paid for most of what he had. Some of the other stuff we pulled out was a little creepier. The kind of thing you'd expect from a place where 50 people ended their lives. I'm talking about bizarre drawings, screaming manifestos about purity and blood, strange symbols. You know, I put it all down to nonsense. Cults are all just pyramid schemes. They're about stuffing you full of hot air, just throwing out words like a professor hoping to get laid. It doesn't mean anything. I have a friend who's a stripper, right? And she tells me the funniest damn thing. Every day these men come in and she works right by the airport so the place gets good traffic, and they come in and pay her cash to see her tits. And these guys, these goddamn guys, they lie to her. She asks them what they do, who they are, and they all lie. I'm a fighter pilot for the Royal Air Force. I work for M6. I'm an oil baron, best friends with E, and oh, did I mention I'm Dean Krav Maga? I'm just saying it's all made up. It has nothing to do with anything except chasing tail. What happened was, people went in there expecting something creepy, and that's what they got. All those paramedics, volunteers, tech teams, whatever they were, even the other cops, they went in hoping to see something weird. Most of them, in one way or another, got their wish. But it's all just confirmation bias, you know? People just look for what they already suspect is there. Even I had a few moments. But it's like, what? Did I really see or hear what I thought I saw? Or was I just tired and stressed? That seems more logical to me. I don't know if you intend to use these interviews to stir this up or to debunk it or what, but I hope it's the latter. We can all look each other in the eye and admit the truth, right? There's nothing in that place. But anyway, yeah, I was there for a long time, and back then I was just a uniformed officer helping with the search. 20 acres, and we didn't know how many people had or hadn't lived there. There were some things that suggested people had had children there. So, it was really important that we knew for sure there weren't half a dozen incest babies starving to death in some bunker. Really terrible stuff. But we needed to do it, so we did. And that mainly involved a good old-fashioned search. That's what I and about a dozen other officers spent the better part of 3 weeks doing. Anyway, I was milling around the creek that ran through the back of the estate when I spotted it. A storm drain. This guy had dozens of these things on his land, and it soon became clear that he used them as a secret way to get around. And this tunnelet was big enough to stand upright in, and it was leaking urine-colored water into the river from the Rollins side of the property. I radioed for backup, but they'd need a few minutes, so I decided to get a little closer and see if I could make anything out. Now, granted, I was a little freaked out. Where I was standing, this thing was chest-high, right? My ankles were submerged up to here in water, and I was craning my head into this massive drain. And I was tired and stressed. And well, that's when I heard it. Crying. Kids crying, except it didn't sound like kids, it sounded like my kids. And you know, I guess that Papa Bear instinct kicked in. Because even though I might have been pissing myself with fear, I pulled myself together, made a mess of my clothes, and went looking for that sound. I didn't really let any thoughts form in my head. In tough times, that can be a terrible idea. I just took a deep breath and kept going and going and going. I must have walked, 2-3 hours maybe. I don't know. It was a dream, I think. Just one long hallucination, but I kept hearing my kids crying for me. They were urging me to hurry. Until I finally found the exit of the tunnel, it opened into some kind of nursery. I guess. It looked like a normal classroom for 3 to 5-year-olds, but only at a glance. Yeah, sure, there were crayon drawings, but a closer look revealed a blood-red eye hovering in the sky while parents had broken bones and were a little bit beyond P13. The books were all DIY art, quite beautiful, but again, it wasn't your usual Dr. Seuss. One story told of 2 friends who wanted to be closer than ever, except one of their families was moving away. So the book went on as normally as you'd expect, talking about the girls' fear and anxiety about being separated, only for the plot to go completely insane and show them sewing their faces together. Turns out everything went well for them. Apparently. The book showed them growing up together, eating the same food and defecating out the other butt, closing one set of eyes and using the other to see. And the whole town was so amazed and impressed that both families decided to stay. And that was the end, just all these people cheering around 2 girls who were growing into each other like an 80s horror movie. Anyway, all that stuff, it was all lit by some kind of red emergency light bulb, but there were no goddamn kids. Blackboards, chalk, small tables, a little play area. There couldn't have been more than 10 kids in there at any one time, and some of the tables looked unused. But no matter how hard I searched, there was no one there. It was all just my head messing with me. I mean, this isn't rocket science. I'm out there looking for children. It's not surprising my sleep-deprived brain started conjuring up sounds out of thin air. And a river, that's some white noise right there. And things like that can make you hear all sorts of things. I have a friend. Every time it rains, he hears his father talking to him. It's more common than you think, like tinnitus. It's just the brain looking for patterns that aren't there. I was just stressed. You know, I've never told anyone this, but I was so out of it that I took that book home. I'm sure I did. When I wasn't looking, I must have just pocketed it, taken it home for my little girl. There's no other explanation, not really. Because the next morning, before setting off again, I looked down, and there she was, my little angel, giggling her heart out at the pictures of two girls merging like a crunchy pair of amoebas. I get a lot of flack from my wife and my grown daughter about my drinking and my temper. I don't feel guilty about any of that. I feel guilty about taking that book home. With how everything turned out, in the end, it was fine. But there were long stretches when Bethany was out there, high as a kite, not quite coherent enough to know what was going on. And if I had messed that girl up, even though everyone tells me it's the drinking, the shouting, the yelling, and occasionally at the beginning, the hitting, I still can't help but feel as though it was leaving that book in her hands that did it. That's my guilt. That's what keeps me up at night. Funny thing is, she swears it appeared on her shelf the night before I came home. Of course, that couldn't possibly be true. Professor Ligotti works at Aberdeen University and was invited to consult on the documents found at the Kentworth compound. He was initially unhappy to receive my call, but seemed pleased when I made it clear he wouldn't have to answer direct questions. Professor Ligotti, *. Comparative neurology is fascinating, but you need to be skeptical. It's not hard to read 1,000 stories and find commonalities between them. And most people who come to me talk about ancient aliens and silly conspiracies. The simple truth is that these legends probably stem from the same source, which is just an older legend. Yes, all cultures mention dragons, but isn't it more rational to assume that what inspired those legends was, for example, another legend, rather than an actual dragon? All right, yes, sure, dinosaur bones might have played a part, but not actual dragons. Yet every time someone wants to talk to me, it's about Mayan and Egyptian pyramids and something about aliens and all that hogwash. I like to imagine a little, but I'm sick of my work being used to fabricate nonsense. At least Peter Rollins paid. The man was a lunatic, a difficult, angry, self-important lunatic, and I'm not surprised at all that he used his charisma to exploit people. But at least he paid for my insights. So he wanted to know about, I suppose I'd call it the evil eye. Most cultures see this as a kind of curse or a malevolent gaze, but older records show this idea permeated the concept of God as an observer. The idea is that feeling watched is fundamental to human psychology. Because without the sense of being an individual amongst a sea of people, it becomes harder to, to forge an identity. It's actually very interesting because it doesn't just fit with ideas of morality and sin, God is watching, so I must be good. But also the rawest bricks we use to understand ourselves as human beings. There's God, there's man. We feel that deep inside, and culturally, this sense of never truly being alone comes from the way we exist in a mental space where there's no boundary between us and our own thoughts. Like, your mind exists in your mind, you can picture a chair, right? And it's there in your head, a chair, but not just a fake chair, an imagined chair, but it's actually ***. It's your neurons firing in your head to create something. It's made of yourself. Strange, isn't it? But in your head, there's you, that mental voice or whatever, and then there's all this other stuff that's also you. And it spills into the idea that we're not alone in our own heads to the extent that some people argue that it's the foundation for all religions, the feeling that our actions matter, that we matter, that something is watching, and we can feel that thing watching us. But equally, there are many religions and cultures that believe God has turned his eye from our existence. Peter was very interested in that idea, the concept that we are no longer of concern to our Creator, that our world is denied that observation, so we replace it with voices in our heads that are just our own. He let slip a few times that he thought it might be possible to turn God's attention back towards us. His background was in neuroscience and mathematics, specifically complex theory, so a surprising amount of what he said went over my head. Though I guess that kind of fabrication is the whole point of a cult. Yes, he did try to recruit me. He also tied it into quantum physics, talking about how the observer changes the physical laws of reality. I checked, and some physicists at the university say that's basically true. Though not at all as mystical as Peter made it out to be, but he said if he could get God's attention back towards us, something about receivers and signals and neural synchronization, then he would have the power to change reality, or maybe something similar. Anyway, the last time I spoke to him was because I asked if that was really what he wanted. He got furiously angry, but I was just trying to cheer him up. And I felt I had a point. I mean, if we're all naughty children sent to the corner on a cosmic scale, do we really want to get God's attention? He must have left for a reason. I'm not sure he'd be pleased if we started throwing excrement at the wall to pull him back to our little corner of creation. But that wasn't really what I wanted to ask him. Not really. I don't know why I didn't ask him, but what was lingering in my head was, what if it's not God's attention we get? Mr. Coast agreed to meet me in his garden. In 2009, his construction and renovation company agreed to take on a contract on behalf of the local council to begin the demolition of the Kentworth compound. Currently, he is involved in a lawsuit with the government for allegedly failing to disclose the property's history, and for subsequent claims by Mr. Coast and several employees that their work at the site led to long-lasting and debilitating psychological and physical injuries. Historically, he has resisted interview attempts, but for reasons unknown, he agreed to speak with me. Mr. Coast *. The hardest thing is having to deal with something no one wants to admit. I used to think there was some big conspiracy, but over time I wondered if there was a simpler explanation. Initially, my boys and I fought tooth and nail just to get the council to admit what they'd done. You could go down the street and ask anyone in that town what happened at that place, and they'd tell you. But as far as the council was concerned, it was just a pile of bricks, and we weren't meant to know anything. But it's been about 10 years since I filed that first lawsuit, and one by one, they've all given up, even after I agreed to cover all legal costs. When I talk to them now, it's like they don't even want to acknowledge it. I mean, these guys, they were there with me. We were all in it. I wasn't sitting behind a desk all day. That's not the kind of company I run. We were friends. Half of them have gone to the other side of the world, and the other half have disappeared off the map, lying around somewhere, drinking stolen beer in a ditch. The rest of them don't want to talk about it. I feel they only let me put their names down out of a sense of obligation to me. As if they owe me something for fighting for them, but deep down, they wish I hadn't bothered. Because sooner or later, a judge or lawyer will ask the only important question and will be called upon to answer it. And it's just, what happened? They ask, and none of us want to answer. We arrived 6 months after the suicides. No one said anything or why. We were told there was an old house, and we had to go in and knock it all down, take everything out, and demolish it brick by brick. We were given a list of acceptable equipment we could rent on behalf of the government, and it wasn't exactly stellar. I think they expected us to do it all with sledgehammers and picks. But damn, it was tempting when they handed us a blank check. Great public sector work, that. Money just being thrown around, and I certainly wanted some of it. But can you imagine rolling into that place? We had no idea what we were about to face. One look, and suddenly everything made sense. Why we were told to choose our quote after the job was done, and the council would pay. There were ridiculous outbuildings on the house. They'd added whole floors, new floors, so many that the place looked like something out of a child's picture book. Besides that, there were 4 portable cabins to deal with, and on 20 acres we found 17 more structures that had sprung up, made of corrugated iron, concrete, and chain link. Oh, and then there were the bunkers. God, to begin with, we weren't happy about any of it, but we had no real way to say how. We just knew it was wrong. There were still books on the shelves, food in the cupboards. All those people, they'd left their belongings, and the cops had done a terrible job of cleaning up. So, in one way, all we had to complain about was that it was a little bigger than we thought. And the council didn't take our complaints too seriously. But in another way, I had to ask my staff to go clean out backpacks still full of the belongings of a bunch of dead kids. That's hard work. Each new room had something truly damaging. And the worst part was how often it would just linger in your head as an insignificant detail until you were lying there late at night, and some deeply disturbing question would pop up, and you had no way to answer it. Like there was a small room, a small clinical space with a sink and a shower, except it was big enough for a few people to get inside. And I didn't really notice much. The mirror was smashed, a small tool cabinet in the corner had its door ripped off its hinges, there were some streaks on the floor. But that stuff was everywhere, you couldn't help but feel like you were walking through the scene of a siege. So that stuff wasn't unusual. No, what bothered me was the calendar. At first, I didn't think much of it. There were all these girls' names on certain dates. Each one had the date, or around it, marked, and this repeated every 28 days like clockwork. Amberly on the 16th, Mary on the 4th of June, Alicia on the 9th. When I flipped it over, some of the names had been covered with gold stars or frowny face stickers, like something you'd see in a school. Anyway, I didn't find it strange until I got home, and my wife, she had a calendar too, one she kept next to her bed. And before I went to sleep, she leaned over and scribbled something and muttered something. And I asked her about it, and she explained that she would be ovulating that weekend. You see, we were trying for a baby at the time. So, she was tracking her cycle, marking the days when we had the best chance of conception. Well, everything was clear then, wasn't it? And I was left with a question I had no comfortable answer for. I think I had to ask myself twice a day, how old were those girls? That kind of thing alone was enough for me to get compensation. By the end of the first weekend, we were all exhausted. 3 guys had called in sick. One of the older guys had gone back to drinking, which worried me a lot. And every day I'd wake up wondering if I could bring myself back there. But the truly bad thing was that the place wasn't dead. I don't know if everyone there died. I don't know exactly what it was, but it wasn't dead. It wasn't finished doing whatever it wanted to do. Maybe it was some kind of ghost. An imprint of all that suffering left behind, or if their crazy hocus-pocus had defiled it or something. We had a child locked in a room on the 5th floor, and it took us 2 hours to find it. A wedge had been jammed under the door from the other side, and I knew for sure that wasn't the kind of prank my buddies would play. When we finally got it out, it had stopped screaming about an hour ago and was just huddled on the floor, sobbing into its own knees. And the room, it was just quiet, just an empty, quiet room with a bed in one corner and some pictures on the walls. We kept asking it what had happened, but the only thing it did was look at the bed, just stare at it as if a lion was about to jump out. Its clothes were torn, it had cuts all over its arms, its shoes were missing. Damn it, we never found them. Never. But it was a mess, and it went straight to the hospital. And then I went back and flipped that bed over. And I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't a trapdoor. I had to stop one of my buddies from trying to go down there. There was something about the way it just led into nothingness. The way there was some kind of faint, almost candlelight, at the bottom of that impossibly deep well. It stopped me from letting anyone try. If it led to a space between the walls or some secret compartment, most likely, it would all collapse with the rest of the house, and that was perfectly fine with me. But that poor child never came back, and as far as I know, it's now living in a home with caregivers, shocked out of its mind by whatever it saw beyond that door. There were other, smaller incidents. A guy lost a finger to a machine that he swore was off and unplugged. A guy had the lights go out on him in the basement, and while he got out unharmed, he ran up screaming loudly about someone else being down there with him, who grabbed his pant leg as he ran back up the stairs and held him there, their greasy, pale hand clutching the fabric so tightly it started to rip. And that's how he eventually freed himself. By the end of the second week, we were all committed to working in pairs, and that seemed to stop the accidents, or whatever they were, from happening for a while. I mean, the whole place just felt hostile, as if it was ready to kill us at any moment, just for being there. You felt watched, as if 1,000 eyes were behind your head, and the moment it became quiet, too quiet, and you were completely alone, it would catch you and swallow you in the blink of an eye. And then there were the goddamn bunkers. 3 bunkers, I think. We gave up after the last one. As far as I know, there were more down there. Many, many more, deep down, in fact. I assume there's at least one more with living people still in it. I guess for context, I should mention that it took the police about a week to dig out the bodies from their various hiding places. Sure, some were lying in the hall, but at least a dozen others were stuffed into cupboards, closets, low compartments, or hanging from attic rafters with bony fingers still pressed to their lips. But even more were in the bunkers. There was an empty one, a classroom, as expected. That one was easily cleared. Though some of the guys kept saying the sound carried strangely down there because they kept picking up snippets of children singing or playing. But another one was a proper safe space, and it was a goddamn massacre. No gore, apart from broken fingernails or whatever they'd done to themselves in a panic. But they were all piled on top of each other, pushing against the door, trying to close it, just too late because they never completely closed it. Whatever followed them down took them out in seconds. Probably. At least that's what the police told us. What they didn't tell us because they didn't know was that one bunker was left for us to find. And like the last one, it was full of bodies. But this time, no police had carried them out before anything rotted, and that was left for us to stumble upon just by the smell. 6 people, 1 adult, 5 children. The children were hiding in different places, but hiding in a childlike way, hiding under bedsheets or in dark corners with their fists pressed into their eyes. And the adult was slumped against the door, trying their best to push it shut. The funny thing is, that goddamn door opened easily with just a push when we got there. And I never understood why all those people had such a hard time closing them. But what does it matter? Something evil had rushed up that last storm drain and lunged at them, and it got them just like it got everyone else. You know when you know what something is, and you don't want to look at it, but you do anyway. We clearly knew what we'd found as soon as we walked in, but I still took a few steps inside and looked around. I saw the children still standing or sitting upright, thumbs in their mouths. Their putrid mouths grinning with lips pulled back so far their teeth and gums protruded. And on the top bunk was a lump. Someone was sitting under the sheet. I mean, damn it. I knew what it was, right? So why did I pull the sheet off? Their eyes were still open, looking at me. Not through me, not behind me, not beside me. No, they were looking straight at me, a teddy bear in one hand, crushed pajama bottoms in the other, and an ancient urine stain soaked into the mattress. They were smiling, like I said. Then we gave up and called the police in. They didn't seem surprised to find more bodies, and if I had to guess, I'd say they endured every second in that place just like we did. And they were just as eager to finish and leave. They knew it was only half done. And while I sympathize with them in some ways, I'll never goddamn forgive them for sending us in and suffering on their behalf. Everyone wants to forget. So did I for a long time. But yesterday my daughter called me, sobbing hysterically from her mother's house. You know what she said? She said she came back from the bathroom in the middle of the night and someone was sitting on her bed. The sheet was pulled over them, so they were just this upright shape. Crying silently, whispering, repeating over and over, "They can't see me, they can't see me, they can't see me." I swear on my goddamn life, I heard those words whispered in that bunker. The anonymous interviewee. Rollins was a total madman. I'm talking about Gene, by the way, not Peter. I never really knew his brother, not really. His whole family was into custom hallucinogens, and there weren't many labs out there as willing to innovate as I was. But like I said, I always dealt with Gene. His brother, he was funny and wild and had the soul of a poet. I told him, I want to drive from coast to coast of America and write a book along the way, and he decided to join me. So we set off with such enormous quantities of mescaline and peyote that it's a miracle we ever returned. Unfortunately, we were in Amsterdam at the time. I think we ended up in Utrecht. Anyway, it was great. In hindsight, we probably should have realized they don't have many canal boats in Nevada. But like I said, Gene was up for a party, and he told me a lot about his old manna special case of offal. He was a mine inspector or something, maybe a geologist. And anyway, one day he went down a dark hole and came back completely different. He was gloomy, malicious, abusive in every way possible, and he insisted on homeschooling the children. Gene was about 16 at the time and ran away for good. But Peter was younger, maybe 8 or 9. Gene told me it pained him to leave his little brother behind, but he had to. When I finally met Peter, he was like his brother, but a little darker, a little less jovial. For the first few years, I thought of him as a photocopy of Gene. Something slightly off, maybe faded, but he wasn't. Gene was interested in the journey, in having fun, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. He and I were keeping that dream alive all the way up to the Bush years, but Peter had very specific requests for what I made for him. And it was only when I worked with him on the actual chemistry that I realized he was intelligent in a way Gene never was. You know, you might get a chance to talk to some of the cops who went into that compound, and one of them was right. He looked like a goddamn gorilla in a suit, but he was right. He'll tell you that all those symbols and hocus pocus were just garbage designed to distract, and he was right. It was never about that. It was about the water supply. I didn't realize Peter was giving this stuff to them in their water. God damn it. I didn't even know what this stuff was. He told me what to make and how to make it, and I did. Sometimes I did other things for him, and he paid me enough cash to stay high for a year. Somewhere along the way, Gene disappeared from the scene. God knows what he's doing now. Grilling with his wife and kids and saying, "Oh my goodness," instead of swearing, probably. But Peter kept going, and sooner or later, I knew we'd butt heads. You see, I've gone further than anyone else alive, and I've done it from the comfort of my own home. And let me tell you what's out there. Let me tell you the secret behind human spirituality. There's nothing. We're just a bunch of hairless monkeys clinging to a goddamn rock, just jerking ourselves off. Once you accept that, all that's left is to grab a banana in one hand and the crab. It's liberating. But Peter, he disagreed, violently disagreed, not just feeling insulted by the idea that there's nothing out there. He genuinely thought that the right state of mind could be used to send out a kind of signal. A "hey, look at us over here" kind of thing. I never really understood what he meant, just that he wanted to attract the attention of asterisk something, and it was all about tuning his mind to the right frequency and then broadcasting an idea. He told me later that he was close, that it was all about getting the numbers right, like firing a dozen flares instead of just one. I don't know why I'm telling you this next part. I'd better be truly anonymous, damn it, but I sabotaged the last shipment. I guess I had a bad trip or something. I just woke up one day with the idea in my head that he wasn't allowed to keep sending this signal out to the world, not with all those people. I don't know. I've never changed my mind. I still insist that there's nothing spiritual out there, not really. It doesn't make sense. That's the only lesson we need to learn. But damn it. Staring into that darkness one night, high as a goddamn kite on the idea that something might be looking back, it just burrowed into me, and I couldn't take it. I never really understood what I had made, but I knew a few minor adjustments would turn it into coffee sweetener. Damn it, I used it a few times, and as far as I could tell, it wasn't even hallucinogenic. So what was he doing giving his followers that stuff every day? I can't say, but I think what difference did it make if I swapped an H for a C and made it into chemical nonsense with no real effect on the body? If there was something out there, I didn't want that damn guy attracting its attention. I didn't know what I didn't know they had built up a dependency. I didn't know its absence would apparently. It was hallucinogenic, and it was also incredibly addictive. And when people go through withdrawal, they don't go through it quietly. I know a lot of the bodies found were resting peacefully in the main hall, but did you notice how often the police threw out the word poisoned? Even though that was the official ruling, they weren't poisoned. Just look at the girls in that car, they were dismembered. The truth is, no one really knows what happened up there. But deep down, I'm pretty sure that, somehow, I'm responsible. This interviewee would not speak to me publicly, but penned the following testimony and requested its inclusion. Written testimony, asterisk. I was about 9 when we moved in. I hated it. I specifically hated it. Dad left Mom when I was about 3, and he was always the financial backbone. Mom had dropped out of school at 14 and had no qualifications. She had no home, no family, so she got a job as a cleaner. And then when it was clear that wouldn't be enough, she got another job and then had to get another. All my siblings were grown with kids and problems of their own, so Mom couldn't count on them. I loved her to death. Even after everything that happened, I understood she had a hard life, and somehow she got tangled up with this Rollins guy. She was very happy until she showed up and saw how young all the other girls were. Every night she was heartbroken, drinking, and quietly crying about how this was her last chance for real happiness. She couldn't understand why he chose her to come along, but even as a child, I knew why. I saw it in the way the teachers looked at us, the way they spoke to us. Our lessons were meditation. Lots of water and lots of hours spent focusing on different shapes and strange images. They looked like static and colors. Sometimes videos, and every day we had to focus on them. And it was hard, but over time it became easier, better. Sometimes children would fall down, shaking, bleeding from their nose, mouth, eyes. Sometimes they would start screaming, and if they did, they would be pulled away and would spend hours drawing what they had seen in the static. It was a slow effect. Something that didn't go away just because you stopped looking at the pictures. Those images burned themselves into your eyes, and that was the purpose. To this day, I insist they put something in our food or water. I don't know. The whole time I was there, I felt different, funny, but not like I was high or anything. I just felt watched all the time. I think there was something about the combination of the images and whatever they were doing to our heads that was the crux of it all. All the ceremonies and prayers and special rituals were just window dressing. It was the children themselves that mattered. Towards the end, I started to fit in. I started to feel like I was looking at something, and it was looking back. But it was open, and it was like some kind of puzzle, and I liked puzzles. I didn't like the way those pictures made me feel, but I hated seeing the other children getting rewarded for doing better than me. If you drew a good picture, an amazing one, the kind Mr. Rollins would take for his personal collection, then they'd give you a bath and there were other treats. To this day, I've never hated anyone as much, but I hated the children who got butter on their toast for breakfast. Looking back, it was all sick. But I wanted to make Mom proud. I wanted her to be happy. If I could be good enough to attract Mr. Rollins' attention, maybe we'd have our own room. Maybe Mom could have a day off on the weekend. Maybe they'd let her do laundry, instead of having to clean their toilets. Peter Rollins was a malevolent piece of work. He had his claws in every single one of us. He knew exactly how to twist and turn his words so you thought you wanted to do what he wanted. They never found his body. They never knew what happened to him. But I know it started slowly. A few people started getting a little sick, nothing violent or anything. They just lost all their energy and started sleeping, collapsing where they worked or making beds out of whatever they could find. Everyone started forgetting things. Mr. Rollins would forget his speech during morning worship. Our teachers would come in and just sit there staring at the wall. All the children stopped playing, one by one. We just turned into zombies, and the rumor going around was there was a disease. But then other rumors started talking about a come-down that I didn't understand as a child. All that time, there was a veneer of life to the place. A kind of fog that you didn't realize was there until it was gone. It got bad pretty quickly. Even Mr. Rollins got sick and went to his room, and we didn't see him again until right at the very end. Soon, everyone stopped waking up or getting out of bed, and once the higher-ups got it, all function collapsed. We stopped harvesting crops, stopped going to town, buying necessities. We even stopped opening the gates for deliveries. Everyone just collapsed somewhere or was sleeping. There were a few nights like that, completely silent, and then the talking started. At first, everyone just mumbled, and it seemed normal if you just saw one of them doing it. Except in the dorm, clearly something was wrong. Everyone was mumbling in unison, making strange, half-coherent grunts and at the same time. Soon it was full words, talking about everything and nothing. Mom got it pretty bad, and she was one of the first to open her eyes. It was creepy holding her hand while she lay there talking in a strange voice, her unblinking eyes fixed on a distant point behind the ceiling. Only recent indecencies, reforms to feel the reforms beneath us, the will because we feel the shining cries of the unbelievers. It was all nonsense, but I remember sitting there and urging her to stop, thinking that silently to myself over and over. Please stop, Mom. Please wake up. Please wake up. She spoke a chorus of voices echoing throughout the entire compound. Please stop, Mom. By that time, everyone had stopped drinking, eating, even moving. One guy had collapsed outside, face up to the sky, and after a day or two lying in the sun, his skin started cracking and bleeding. Most of the kids got through it half decently. The sickness was terrible, feeling like being hit by a train, like the world's worst hangover. Except you're just a kid and you don't know why, but we'd still move around and try to help where we could. Though we all mostly spent our time next to our parents feeding and watering them. Even the youngest of us had a sense that everything was deeply, darkly wrong. You couldn't hear that chanting and feel any other way. My mother was the first to stand up. She swung her legs over and looked at me, and she was still talking but looking directly at me, and all I saw was hatred. It was the most terrifying, heartbreaking thing I'd ever seen. I couldn't understand why she looked at me like that, but she did. And it hurt me so much that I fell back and started sobbing like a toddler. I knew she was going to kill me. I knew it, and I accepted it. Because in my childish mind, I couldn't imagine doing anything against her. She was the arbiter of my entire life, my creator and nurturer, and I knew there was nothing I could do to stop her. My screams rose higher as she held the knife, rising and rising until all sound disappeared, and it became a high-pitched whistle of air escaping my lips, like the cry of someone dreaming to wake up. As she plunged the knife into her throat, the small blade disappeared into her skin like a magic trick. I stopped wailing and stared. She pulled it across completely, and I realized that all around me, the other adults had stood up. One of them I don't remember, she was talking, asking what happened and taking it all in. but I wasn't really paying attention to her. I was looking at my mother, her throat streaming red rivers down her dirty camisole. She didn't gag or cry or even move much. She just waited a few long seconds before pulling it out and starting again, this time in her stomach. I ran, slipping at one point and hitting my head very hard. But I kept going, catching glimpses of people all over the compound standing up and moving towards unknown targets. Some were adults who had returned to normal. One even tried to grab me and herd me along with some other children to safety. But I broke free and headed for the fence. When several dozen chanting adults finally broke through the front door of the farmhouse, that's when the screaming reached its peak. I'll never know exactly what they did to each other, but it didn't sound good. By the time I looked back, I was right by the fence, probably 200 meters from the main house, and I could see shapes moving in the windows. But the shapes were confusing. I think they were dismembering each other, and through the sounds of terrible screams, a few of them were singing. It wasn't a sound like anything I'd ever heard before. But it almost brought me down, and I had to fight the urge to just collapse and give up. I knew there was a small spot near the fence large enough to slip through, and that's what I used to escape the house. However, the driveway to the estate was very long, a single muddy track I had to travel in the dark. At one point, a car came roaring past, and I almost jumped out crying for help. But I remembered where it came from, and instead, I jumped into a ditch and hid in the dark as its blinding lights swept overhead. Once it passed, I tried to see who was in it. But all I could make out were a few heads and something on the roof of the car. I thought it looked like a person, but a deep part of my mind told me it wasn't. In my nightmares, I go back to that road, walking, and I know it will never end, and the sun will never rise. I can see a sign in the distance telling me I'm close to the main road, but I know my eyes can't be trusted. Just as I know that something left the compound to come looking for me. There was no cover, just open fields and a few fences. But in the dark, it was all just ink blots that I couldn't focus on. Contrasted only by the slightly blue night sky, sometimes not very blue or like a sky, but rather like a film of rotting oil paint. Mr. Rollins, I found him crawling out of a storm drain right at the edge of the 4-mile-long road. It was true, he had some kind of escape route, but the poor guy hadn't really thought it through. Somewhere along the way, he had ordered it sealed off with an iron gate locked with a padlock, to which only he had the key. That's what he told me anyway, screaming and crying for some kind of help. He was naked, clearly without the key he desperately needed, and I tried to help him. But clearly, even with my childish mind, I knew there was no way to move that gate, not without tearing the damn hinges out of the concrete. Meanwhile, his cries just got worse and worse, and eventually I had to back away because he started grabbing and pulling at me. He was trying to drag my arm into the tunnel, glancing anxiously over his shoulder. I didn't like the look in his eyes, and when I heard the clattering footsteps behind him, I knew why. "Please, boy," he whimpered. "Just give me your hand." Something rattled in the tunnel just out of sight, but damn it, close enough that it was the loudest thing in the night. Just like that, all pity fell from Mr. Rollins' face. "Give me your damn hand," he screamed. His face was contorted like an animal's. "Give it here and die with me, you piece of trash." I turned my back and ran, horrified by the sounds coming from that grate. Not just his screaming, but the actual sounds of what was happening to his body. I remember him saying on my first day that when God's eye returned to our humble world, he would be first and foremost in God's attention. Personally, I don't believe it was God looking back at us. But I think Mr. Rollins got special attention. Gary Willow is a former YouTube and Instagram influencer, better known as a member of Riley Alton's entourage. A lifelong friend of Riley's, Gary quit his job in 2011 to work for Riley's burgeoning production company. Specializing in urban exploration and paranormal phenomena, Riley's YouTube channel boasted millions of followers and viewers. Although after his death, the account was taken down and all content deleted. In 2013, as part of a series on mass suicides and cults, Riley, along with Gary and 3 other members of his crew, broke into the Kentworth compound to film what was expected to be one of their most popular videos. Gary Willow *. You know, it was never fake. I'm not saying we actually caught ghosts or anything, but everyone insisted we just made it all up. I swear half our audience were skeptics, desperate to prove us wrong. Like in that abandoned club we went to in Brazil where all those people were shot. I swear on my life that door moved on its own. No fishing wire, it really just moved on its own. Riley was many things, but he wasn't really that fake. I've met a lot of influencers, and yes, he was cut from the same cloth, but at the same time, he was better than most of them. And it was me, funny enough, who heard about the Kentworth compound, not Riley. I got a tip from someone, and usually it's all rubbish, but the more I looked into this story, the more real it became. I couldn't believe no one was talking about this place and the Rollins cult. Sure, it wasn't really huge in terms of fatalities, but the sheer weirdness of it all was just amazing. Of course, looking back with what happened to our YouTube channel, it's obvious why the story was hushed up and frankly censored in some parts. Enough money can buy you anything. We were stupid. We rolled up there thinking it was a gold mine. We had become so desensitized that the goosebumps on our skin and the screaming voice in the back of our heads telling us to get out were just another sign that we had made the right decision driving all the way there. Parts of the house were half demolished, windows smashed, plasterwork ripped out, tools and excavators still rotting where the construction company had ultimately tried and failed to finish the job. It was perfect. You could go into one room and capture footage of a half-collapsed wall, bricks crushing a child's tricycle. And in another room, there would be a dining table with cutlery still laid out. I'm talking about blood streaks on windows, fingernails scattered across the floor next to scratches in the wood. Smashed kitchen cupboards with children's blankets rolled up in the back, soaked in God knows what. And it was silent out there. Completely haunting, like when you're in a funeral home and your mind starts playing tricks on you, so you think you can hear the sound of something breathing, but is it just the sound of blood pumping in your own skull? As if there's a feeling you can hear something almost embedded in the white noise in your own head, like voices coming from a scrambled television signal. Even when things started moving, we all just thought it was great footage. Windows opening for no reason, doors slamming, music playing from smashed speakers. We just kept poking it for fun, until we got to the top floor where the leader's room was. I went in first to get some establishing shots, and even though Riley and the others were no more than a few feet behind, I felt scared, truly properly scared for the first time. A chill washed over me as if I had just stepped onto my own grave. And as I looked around the bare walls and the ascetic bed, I noticed something that ripped a hole through my stomach like the whole world had just dropped right out from under my feet. There was a hand, a disgusting, deformed thing, gray in the dim moonlight. All the fingers were different lengths, like a mutated spider. It was a demon's hand, the kind of thing you'd imagine scratching at your bedroom window late at night. And when I spotted it, I was completely silent, gasping for breath as I grappled with the implications of what I was seeing. All the tension in me finally broke as that hand moved, edging out a little further from under the bed, and I spun around to rush for the door. That's when the door behind me slammed shut. I dislocated my shoulder trying to break it down. Somehow, even with a large round window embedded in one wall and a full moon, that room started getting darker, and I felt this desperate need to escape. I was screaming so loud I didn't realize the others were screaming for help too. All that mattered to me was leaving, getting out at any cost. I didn't want to look back. Everything in my head was just pure nightmare. So I kept my face fixed on the door that I was punching and kicking while the skin on my back crawled, and I was so scared, damn it, that I could feel my vision starting to blur. I was almost unconscious. That's how scared I was. It wasn't just the dark, no. I knew with absolute certainty that something was approaching me. The air was getting colder. A faint scratching was present just beneath the sound of my own shrieks, and the mere presence of that thing made the skin on my back crawl. And the feeling was getting worse with every second. It got so bad that I turned around, desperate to escape the fear. That's how it works, right? You scare yourself about something that isn't real, like, for instance, a hand under the bed, and then your mind does the rest. All you need to do is assert yourself, fight back against the darkness and face it, and you'll see it's all just imagination. But there really was something else in that room with me. A man, or something like a man. He had long, straight hair, but his face looked like a pile of folds. No expression because he had nothing to express, no eyes or mouth, just a kind of jumbled mass of skin like braided dough. I thought there were eyes, but they looked like spider eyes buried among the crevices of a crab shell. There was something about that face, the way I couldn't read it or its intentions, the way it completely defied everything I knew about living creatures. It pushed me over the edge, and I passed out. When I came to, I was out in the yard. My camera was smashed, and I was missing 3 fingers, bitten right at the knuckle. The doctor thought it looked like a turtle had done it. And sometimes at night, I get images of my hand being pulled towards a biting beak hidden beneath loose, wet, and cold-to-the-touch flesh. There was no sign of anyone else around me when I woke up, but I didn't stay to look. I ran straight for the car, and I drove away so damn fast that I almost flipped the car, making a left turn out of the driveway. Right by the property line as I turned, I saw an old storm drain, something tied with heavy iron bars. I only glimpsed it by sheer chance, and I was going too fast to get a good look. But I swear I saw someone's hand gripping those bars. Not a disgusting, pockmarked hand like the one that had crawled out from under that bed, but a familiar hand, a normal hand. It was one of the others who had come with me, I think. They call it survivor's guilt, and they tell me it's normal, but nothing about what I went through was normal. And I think what bothers me is that deep down, I'm afraid I wasn't the only survivor, and the hand I saw gripping those bars. I'm afraid its owner is still down there, still trapped. They all got caught by that place, and that's the problem. I just don't know. I'll never know. None of us will know. Arnold Milson is a short man with sideburns and a sparse beard. He stood looking at me with beady eyes as I approached his front porch as if I might bite him. I know he was almost 50, but he looked considerably older. Arnold Milson, asterisk. You always hear about kids wandering into places they shouldn't, messing around near wells and then falling down them. I guess it shouldn't be surprising that I fell down with my bad leg. But the truth is, the first thing I felt when I opened my eyes wasn't pain or confusion, but just pure shame. You always hear about kids falling down wells, not 38-year-old men. But there I was, hip slightly problematic, stuck down a 30-foot damn hole in the ground. Not that there was any warning, no sign, no wall, just a literal hole in the middle of a hillside I had just crossed. Just bad luck. Coming from the other direction, I would have spotted it a mile away and avoided it easily. But I didn't, and I was stuck down there in the dark, in waist-deep water that was old and dark and smelled of urine. Probably mine. Thank God I had my phone on me, and it was still dry in my jacket pocket. A quick call, and my sister was on her way with the police. But what did that actually mean? Well, it meant I wasn't going to die there. But it wasn't like I could give her my exact location. I didn't have GPS, nor could I get a signal down there, and she had to call the police and then come find me. And that wouldn't be fast, so I was stuck down there. Not forever, but it eventually took them 11 hours to find me and another 2 hours to rescue me. Those 13 hours, to me, they were like the longest book ever written. It started with a kind of calm patience. I fought the urge to panic, especially knowing help was on the way. I ignored my surroundings and focused on the light above. I ignored the smell around me and the way the water made my skin itch. I told myself I wouldn't let it get to me. Blind panic. I focused on my breathing, talking out loud to break the silence. I even sang for a while. That was the first hour. Sooner or later, my mind was going to wander. It had to. So I tried to put it on an organized path. I kicked around with my feet until I hit something solid. It was a wooden plank. I stood up on it, lifting myself another 6 inches out of the water, and then stood down. It was hard to keep my balance on it with my leg, but that's pretty much all I could feel around. It sounds silly now, but I didn't want to look around too much, so I kept my phone light off for that first hour. It was the spiders. I knew they were down there. I was terrified of them. And I knew from experience the best place to find big, hairy, disgusting ones was in a dark hole rarely trodden by human feet. And oh boy, this place was hallowed ground for spiders. So far, I'd crudely figured out that the wall was soft earth with thick tree roots protruding. But I could hear something dripping, and it wasn't above or below, but next to me. And somehow it sounded distant. I told myself this was exactly why I had to keep my mind on track. The dripping didn't matter, it didn't mean anything. But that's a long time to stand there and pretend like I wasn't terrified, so eventually I gave in. I turned on my light and regretted it instantly. There were at least 7 of them. Huge, hairy things, too big to live in a house. These weren't the kind of house spiders you'd find under a sofa. I hated them. I hated the sight of them. Their sheer presence burned a hole in my skin even through my clothes. The biggest one was almost the width of my palm, and for a brief moment, I told myself I had fallen right into my personal hell. The thought was right, my timing was wrong. As soon as I turned it on, my light sent all the creepy crawlies scurrying. And all right, while the sight of their wiry legs clambering over each other almost made me sick, the truth is that's all it was. They were harmless, completely and utterly benign. And once they were gone, I could finally recall why I'd turned on the light in the first place. And I swung it around, looking for the source of the dripping until I spotted a small iron grate in the wall. I'm not exactly an expert on wells, so I wasn't sure what to make of it. I usually thought wells pushed water or were just big holes. If any tunnels intersected them, they should also push water or at least be created by underground rivers and so on. Who, I wondered, would spend the time or effort to cement a big dam grate into one of these tunnels, and for what reason? To keep someone out, to keep them in. And this tunnel wasn't more than 2 or 3 feet high, and the grate was even smaller than that. Perhaps a minute at most. I tried to shine the light around, but all I saw were dense, dripping walls of clay and rock. A place so dark it practically resisted the flashlight. For a brief moment, I considered trying to pull the loose grate out, but I worried it might compromise the well's structure. Nor could I be sure if I wanted to get much closer to it than I already was. I tried to tell myself it was a soothing presence. The tunnel right next to me should have done something to break up the oppressive sense of enclosed space. But if anything, it made me feel vulnerable. I looked up towards the light and saw no sign, just a pale blue disk, and I briefly wondered if the spiders had left me behind for whatever. I don't know. I was thinking silly things that at the time seemed illogical, but the feeling felt as real as the water soaking my hips and legs. I felt vulnerable knowing about the tunnel. I didn't like having it there right next to me, and without thinking, I leaned against the opposite wall. I turned off the light and desperately tried to clear my mind of this anxiety. I looked back up towards the sky, and someone was looking down. I should have jumped for joy, and for a moment I almost did. But I couldn't make out this person. It wasn't like catching a glimpse of a friend on the street. All I could see was an outline, a silhouette cut out of the sky. The distance felt alien. I couldn't hear or see anything about them. It was all just dripping and lapping by me, but from up there, nothing but the stony silence of a faint breeze. And this person, they were bending over the hole with both arms draped across the aperture as if they were surveying a kill. I suddenly felt a little bit like a trapped rodent. "Hello," I yelled. I've fallen. They slid away without making a sound. It could have been nothing. No one there at all except a trick of the light. Or maybe there was someone and all they saw was darkness. Maybe the wind was too strong up there. They didn't have a chance to hear me. Or maybe I looked back at the grate, the vulnerability magnified. My mind was making the strangest connections. Wasn't the Kentworth compound nearby? They had tunnels, right? The kids talked about strange shapes and noises up there all the time. By now, my heart was pounding. Isn't it amazing how vivid the imagination can be sometimes? I was lost in my own head. Standing there, eyes wide open, staring at the patch of darkness where I felt a faint breeze blowing. I couldn't see a damn thing, but in my head, I could clearly visualize everything. Right there, just a few feet away, was a twisted monster. Their smiles were pinned wide to the sides of their heads like in the Hellraiser movie. That scared me to death as a kid. And I kept replaying this scene, over and over, tormenting myself. Sometimes it would be a dead child, pale hands gripping the sides of the bars, a malevolent ghost intent on trapping me in a twisted reenactment of their own death. Other times it would be spiders, a giant one pushing the grate aside so its knotty, clacking legs could engulf and pull me towards its 8-limbed body's center. Or maybe even 1,000 tiny ones bulging through the bars like jelly squeezed through wire. To think that kind of horror lies beneath all of us. All I had to work with were slick walls, water, and mud. But in a few short hours, my own head had turned that place into Hades itself. I kept asking myself how it had gone from a quick early morning walk to incessant psychological torture in one misplaced step, and eventually, it became too much to bear. I checked my phone and saw that not more than half an hour had passed since I last looked. All my imagination had done was slow the passage of time and make it infinitely worse. So I gathered the courage to turn on my light and re-examine the small tunnel. It was as before, just faint dripping mud and stagnant water seeping into the well. It wasn't even making a sound. I moved the light around a little more, but each time I did, the shadow cast by the bars moved everywhere. It was like a strobe light, and I was ready to give up when my brain told me to freeze. I don't know why, not immediately, but it did with such urgency that I stopped completely. And that's when I saw it the movement had been obscured by myself. I still can't tell you exactly what it was, but it looked almost like the wall itself was moving. And then the wall looked at me. The thing that just seconds before had been a misshapen lump of mud was a head turned to look directly at me. No nose, not even really a mouth, just features carved into the clay. But those eyes, they were bloodshot orbs, rich and vibrant with familiar detail, but somehow completely alien. I couldn't read them, their expression, and that scared me to death. My mind fired with 1,000 questions about who they were, how they got there if they were human. But the question that was etched in red letters and spread across my mind like a neon exit sign was the one I grasped and couldn't let go of. What did they want? They weren't startled when I spotted them, but they did start moving faster. It felt like I was watching myself from a distance, like an out-of-body experience. I couldn't comprehend that this was happening, that someone was down there looking like something out of a horror movie and moving right towards me. When they reached the grate, they started pushing against it, and this thing was precisely cemented into the concrete. I could see it starting to bulge, and I rushed forward and slammed a foot against the metal to hold it in place. That meant getting closer, and it meant I caught a glimpse of them before I kicked the grate back into position. All I saw were fragment eyes, rotten teeth, something bright catching the light. I soon found out what it was when something slid against my heel, long and sharp. I recoiled instantly, shocked and disgusted at the sight of blood flowing and mixing with the foul groundwater I was standing in. And when I looked back, there was a glittering blade protruding from between the iron bars, and then it repeated. The grate started moving, started pushing. A single eye, a pupil as big as a coin with ghostly reflections looking back at me with chilling indifference. I stepped forward and kicked again. This time they slid, but I saw the full length of that blade, and a part of me registered how bad the situation was. The next time I kicked at them, I wasn't so lucky, and the blade slid right into the arch of my foot, tearing through my thick walking boot and drawing a gruesome picture on its way out. But I didn't give way. I held it there, gripping tightly while my attacker satisfied themselves, chopping away as if they were breaking ice. The only sounds were my groans, splashing water, and the heavy, guttural breathing of whatever lay on the other side. And I thought before it was hell. When they finally stopped attacking, my right foot was in tatters, and I fell back into the water with relief. Thank God I landed on that wooden plank. It kept my head above water and prevented me from losing all my balance. The thing smiled at me then, stretching a toothless mouth from ear to ear, drooling with pink foam. Still no nose, no hair, just a shape carved right out of the mud. At least that's what it looked like. That hungry maw must have led to a real stomach of flesh and blood. My attacker was probably nothing more than a dirt-caked maniac, but whoever they were twisted so far from the human ideal. They scared me worse than any special effect I've seen. I found myself starting to scream. This thing wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't slinking back into the depths. It was enjoying this experience, enjoying my terror and suffering. At least that's what I imagined. Because the truth is, I don't know what it wanted. That face, even when smiling, looked like the face of an irrational fool. It just kept breathing heavily, drooling, its eyes fixed on me like a pervert in the bushes. And I just wanted it to stop. I wanted to wake up, break the bubble, and escape the hallucination. Anything but staying like this, trapped in its gaze while my mind turned seconds into decades. I didn't pass out, I didn't wake up, it didn't try to break through again. No conclusion, no inciting incident to overcome the fear. Just me and that thing less than a meter apart, and it took another 7 hours before I finally got out. They amputated my foot, not just because of the terrible damage that had been done to it, but also because of the putrid infection that developed. The diseases lurking in that water almost killed me, and the official word is I broke my leg in a disgusting way and spent half a day trapped in a feverish delirium. Oh God, I truly wish that's what I could believe. But every long, agonizing second stuck down there is still etched in my memory like an epitaph in granite. I pinched myself, slapped myself, cried, sobbed, jumped up and down. Nothing about my time down there was a dream. It was hard, and when it caught the light, it sparkled like metal. The current interviewee has requested strict anonymity. Anonymous researcher, *. The acquisition of the compound in question was never discussed with us or anyone in the research team. It was found that's all that matters. If it hadn't been for that letter, I would never have drawn the connection between the compound we were testing and the events at the Kentworth compound. On one hand, it was a relief to realize that this was bigger than just us. But at the same time, I think we all secretly hoped that we were going crazy, and this proved otherwise. Thank God we never moved on to human testing. It was bad enough that we weren't really equipped for the job. You always think the government would pick the top people in their field for this secret espionage work. But often, they don't. They contract out to a company like ours and just don't tell anyone the truth. I hear they pick companies with poor safety records as a cover. And we had just come off a terrible scandal involving some children, a river, and a chemical that turned you blue. Even at the time, I remember thinking we'd make pretty good scapegoats if that's what they were looking for. I was vindicated over time, but not before the worst of it. Like I said, we never got to humans, but we started testing with mice and rats. When we first mapped the chemical structure of the compound, all our software told us it would be inert in the central nervous system. Although a deep learning algorithm we occasionally used in forensic cases went insane and practically melted, we thought nothing of it because the first tests immediately afterward showed that the compound was exactly that. Inert, no behavioral changes at all. And apart from strange electrical readings on an EEG, brain scans showed no difference either. Of course, some things need to accumulate over time, and brain scans are very limited in what they actually tell us. It's like trying to predict what software a computer is running by taking a heat map of its components. Sure, it tells you something, but it's not exactly a magic window into the underlying operations. All you can do is just keep testing and see what results you get. I suppose I should mention at this point that our laboratory was located in a pretty remote location. Our company was a subsidiary of some giant PMC, and we were located along with a few other groups on an oil rig that was looking into certain bacteria. And well, this is a pretty tough place to live at the best of times. It's lonely, but always busy, always filled with hundreds of anonymous people ignoring you as they rush past. And my team, we were buried deep in the heart of this place, suspended above the sea below. So everyone panicked. I don't know exactly how, but they did. It had never happened before. But one by one, my staff started calling in sick more and more often until pretty soon, I wondered why I was being abandoned. It turns out after a very frank and heated meeting I held one day in our lunchroom that there was a kind of widespread anxiety. There were maybe 6 of us at most. And I listened as they told me about how the rodents stared at them, how machinery broke down at 10 times the normal rate, and how they felt watched in any room when left alone. The worst thing was, I had noticed it too. The mice and rats had, from a changed behavior to changed levels over a period of a month, and now they no longer squeaked or played or groomed. Instead, they simply stared, and it was always us that held their attention. They stopped sleeping, eating, even moving. And some, quite a few of them, started dying from sheer indifference. That's when someone stood up and told me about how they had seen something particularly disturbing. They were cleaning out the tanks one day, dumping dead rats into a special garbage bag ready for incineration when they reached in, and the living ones attacked her, biting through heavy-duty gloves and fighting so fiercely that she lost it to them. Luckily, she pulled her hand out in time and slammed the glass lid shut. But the nightmare wasn't over, because that's when the bag moved, the one containing dozens of dead pink bodies, their dark red eyes staring at her from pointed albino faces. Thank God the incinerator was right there in the lab, and thank God she had enough presence of mind to turn it on already. In a quick burst of terror and bravery, she grabbed the bag and practically threw it into the flames, crying as she heard their agonizing shrieks. But what exactly was all this I was hearing? I had to do something with that information, that was for sure, but I didn't know anything. We took on dangerous work, we knew that. I eventually agreed to a new rule that no one would be left alone in the lab. Even if someone had to go to the toilet, they just had to go in pairs and stay close together. I dismissed it as a kind of contagious fear, brushing aside my concerns that we were all long-term employees accustomed to the working conditions. I also decided to take on more of the lab work and just to show everyone we weren't in any real danger. I took on some late-night shifts and did them alone. I would often go in at night ready to run any necessary tests and try my best to pretend everything was fine. The rumble of the ocean and the ceaseless noise of machinery seemed too distant to be beneath that lab, and pretty soon I got a vague sense of being buried underground. It was the silence. You see, that place was never silent. Not even at night. There were thousands of specimens in that room and the 4 other rooms next door. Mice, rats, rhesus monkeys, zebrafish, you name it, we had it. It wasn't like we could go down to the corner store. We had to stock up, and somehow everything was just deathly silent. Not a squeak, chirp, hoot, or tweet. The first time I noticed it, I assessed my surroundings and tried to swallow my horror. The specimens weren't sleeping, at least not the rats, all of them wide-eyed, backs pressed against their cages, staring at the glass observation boxes we used for testing. And the rats, in turn, were looking at me, hind legs curled, ready to pounce, pink ears erect and alert, and sleek tails wrapped around their plump bodies. I finally gave up pretending. I ran the tests so quickly that I dropped a bottle of iOS and left it there instead of cleaning it up. I decided I'd come in early the next day to sort it out. Anything, I told myself, anything was better than staying there alone. When it came time to run a new condition, taking half the surviving rats and stopping their exposure to the compound, I thought it would be good to see what happened. I was still naive enough to find all this, very slightly thrilling. The pounding horror I felt was still alien enough, and everything still seemed safe enough that I wanted to continue. I can't even imagine how. I mean, I thought they would die or return to normal. Right? They tore through themselves and then the glass. And that's not an exaggeration. They tore through themselves first, with limbs half-severed and intestines exposed. They turned to the glass and stabbed themselves, creating a breach. We're still not entirely sure how they did it, but as soon as they broke through, they lunged straight for the other rats. The ones who were still on the compound, still unaffected. One of the technicians tried to intervene but backed off after a few rats detached themselves from the sea of bodies, hairy and twitching, and started biting his ankles. By the time someone finally attached some liquid nitrogen to spray them, they had broken through to their companions and covered the walls in blood. When it was all over, we were left with a giant ice sculpture. The way they breached the glass with bloody streaks meant we never got a proper look at what was going on. But once the mist cleared, and all you could hear was the cracking of ice and flesh, we saw a half-melted pile of flesh. It was like a fight scene paused in time, except the gore-filled mountain held a strange quality near its center. We spotted rats with 3 eyes, 5 legs, 2 tails, and so on. It was like they had started merging, like reversed cell division. I remember us debating whether to incinerate it. I was trying to make the case to keep it, arguing that we owed our employers results, and this was one of the most profound things we could offer them. Maybe they would even increase our funding. However, the others were having none of it, crying to me just to let them incinerate the whole thing. I steadfastly resisted until from behind me, I heard a quiet rustle. I looked back. We had spent hours staring at that thing and arguing with each other. And near the very top, you could see the layer of frost was fading, and where it had faded, white fur curled together in impossible knots was starting to thaw. There was the faintest movement of a single claw bending and scratching at the ice as if to break free. I incinerated it. The others thought it was some kind of moral victory. Damn it! Even I felt a rush of righteousness as the 3 of us threw it into the scorching heat. But I also knew we weren't living in a fairy tale, and our employers would want to know what happened. Perhaps it's because I was the one who had to explain it to them, but I didn't think they'd be too pleased with what I had to say. And of course, they weren't. Any hope of increased funding vanished, and I was told quite bluntly that I would lose my job if we didn't continue with further testing. I asked if that meant more rats, and the answer made me feel like I was losing my mind. "Oh no," they said, "we're moving to monkeys." The man before me was unusual only in that he was wearing dark glasses even in a dimly lit room. Unlike all the other interviewees, he had contacted me to discuss his thoughts on the Kentworth compound, and insisted I hear his thoughts on the matter. He was frail, but exuded a calm energy among other things, and spoke calmly into the microphone. The man in dark glasses, "You're smaller than I expected. Sorry, that's a small joke. It's just I've heard about you. Have you heard about me? I'm a writer and I don't know. Perhaps Peter read my book or one of the others in his cult. I met him once buying a book from his father. He was rude. I think he thought I was a tourist, a passerby looking for a bit of inspiration to write another cheap novel. I thought he was a little punk, to be honest." And I ignored the angry teenager until his father finally chased him out of the room, and our work continued. If you told me he would go on to do what he did, I would have thought it unlikely. Despite all his supposed power, Peter was just a little boy trying to reach his mother. She was a strict Christian, and she met a mysterious end not long after her husband returned from a particularly strange overseas trip. I can imagine how she must have reacted to the first glimpse of his nocturnal activities. What I can't imagine is her agreeing to it. I think Peter figured that out too, and I think he spent the rest of his life desperately trying to prove her right. But at the same time, the power in those books was undeniable. Their mere existence pissed on the concept of an Abrahamic God, or at least one who cared about us. And there, I think, lay the first seed of Peter Rollins' very strange activities. He wanted to find God, and he wanted to do it in a way that proved once and for all that his mother and father could coexist. But what do I know? I'm just a writer, an armchair psychologist. I can't help but wonder if you knew that or if it was necessary to provide a little context for the things you saw. Context is always good, I explained. Well, that's why Peter went looking for God. Of course, what he found was an observer, one who watches. Only Peter never really thought too hard about philosophy, or the world, or the nature of knowledge. It didn't occur to him that in the same way we have an idea of something, say a chair, in our heads, this other thing must also learn and remember us. Being known is a very powerful thing. Some might say the building blocks of our existence are made of nothing but neurons and molecules. We think nothing of it, looking at something and creating a representation of it buried deep in our minds. If Peter had read his father's work a little more carefully, he might have realized that there are some things that don't think with electricity, but rather with frothing flesh and hard physical matter. The entire universe is made of a single living organism whose mind operates on the spin of planets and the death of stars. A cosmic brain where everything that is thought is rendered not in abstract patterns of neural activity, but in real, actual physical matter. And everything it sees, observes, knows, is added to its mind. That, of course, means Peter is still alive in some sense. You know, we have this saying about how the dead live on in our memories. Well, depending on who's remembering you, that's not always a good thing, especially when your own memories and thoughts are part of reality, and so you're just spreading out everywhere. And that's not even getting into the subject of other things hidden away in this cosmic entity's memory. When Peter first broke the membrane between realities, I dare say more things spilled out than were sucked in. That patch of land won't be right for 1,000,000 years, by my estimate. Everything's a little thinner there now, and I bet some things are still very eager to reach through and recreate the last party they had. It's like sticking your hand through the bars of a lion's cage. I guess the irony is that Peter went looking for God, but he ended up finding a pretty good substitute for the Christian concept of hell. On the other hand, he's also in a place where his own thoughts can be real. I bet he's high on that. Wouldn't be surprised if he just recreated the Kentworth compound with more teenage girls and no money troubles. He really struck me as that shallow. Although somehow, I doubt he's having a party over there, at least he has friends, right? And an ever-expanding list too, they're not sure they'll ever meet. Ah yes, the place is bigger than you can imagine. I doubt it has any designs on us. Humans weren't meant to know everything. I guess that must make all this. The interviewee gestured towards my body a bit like a trip. Can I ask something? Do they know? Am I giving it away? Where are you even publishing this? I guess it doesn't matter to you, right? All that matters is people read it because you just need a flicker of their attention to perceive them, and then boom, you've got them. You can look anywhere, just as long as you know that's where you want to look. I'm not hurting anyone. No, but I think most people would agree. It's a creepy idea, anyone you look at. I mean, am I being recreated right now over there? In your world? Well, I guess time isn't linear for you, right? What was that I read? It stretches out forever like the stars in the sky. So, in a sense, your idea of Peter predated the actual Peter. Really apples and oranges. Well, I suppose the upside of it is now I'm somewhat immortal, right? There will always be an exact physical copy of me over there, living, breathing, existing. It's just a little unsettling to imagine exactly what that must be like. And everyone else, anyone who reads this, it will be like asking you to forget a chair you just saw. Everyone is made aware of me, and they in turn are brought into my attention. Remarkable, utterly remarkable. Are you going to take over the whole world or just a nice collection? I haven't really thought about it. I've certainly enjoyed observing people, almost as much as I've enjoyed watching people read the transcripts. Well, you have all the time in the world to decide. Yes, I suppose so. I don't suppose while I have you here you have anything to do with my own little situation? No, that's entirely your own doing. Do you have anything else to add to your testimony? After all, I'm supposed to be doing observational work. No, that's fair. I understand. I appreciate you talking to me like this. It's been a long journey to get here. I know. Yes, of course you know. You created a perfect atomic replica of my own brain. And in fact, you created it before I was born. Try not to think about it. I can tell you the same thing. I guess if I have anything to add, it's that you should know Peter Rollins was a malevolent sort, but his followers were all just unlucky people. I'm not an overly compassionate person, but I'd like to think they weren't pitied by whatever else lurks in the literal hallways of your mind. I'd like to think that if they're burning, somehow Peter's fire is a little hotter than everyone else's, because I know what some of those rituals involved. I also know the kind of pain you have to inflict on someone to learn what he learned. And well, he truly deserves it. As a psychiatrist, I am accustomed to patients who don't know boundaries. But this person, the latest one, doesn't even seem to understand what a human being is. I sat down in my chair and turned to a fresh, blank page on my clipboard. Most psychiatrists use tablets these days. Sometimes I wonder if I deliberately try to be different. Probably. Patients don't notice, they don't even realize. In fact, it's exactly what they expect. And I wonder if that's why I do it. This person didn't notice anything either. Just like the guy before, I've forgotten his name again. It started with a ka. For the past 45 minutes, I've had to carefully choose my words to avoid mentioning his name. It's awkward, distracting me from his issues. He was a pervert, or at least he used to be. He was terrifyingly afraid of women. I could see it in the way he looked at me. If I'd laughed at him, told him he was crude, he probably would have killed me, a very high risk. Luckily, he wasn't funny at all. But this person, where did the current one come from? I don't remember scheduling him, but Tracy couldn't have let him in without an appointment. Is this the addicted man? Oh God, it's like forgetting names again. I have to be careful. Why don't you introduce yourself a bit? I said, fiddling with my pen. Tell me about yourself. I always thought I was the only one who zoned out during long silences. This person also seemed to be thinking, would he just be silent the whole session? It was strange, but he was looking at me with a rather cheerful expression. I don't often see such serene eyes. Is everything all right? I asked. Are you comfortable? I'm very comfortable, he replied. Goodness, his voice was nothing like I imagined. That voice could be on the radio, or rather on a government tape, ready to be broadcast on the BBC when the world finally ended. It had to make more sense. It was the voice I could imagine professionally explaining to me to stay calm and drown the children to spare them from the horror. His voice was emotionless. He spoke like an alien, looked like one too. If anyone was wearing a skin suit, it was definitely this guy. Oh shoot, he's saying something. Moving here has been difficult for me. I think you call it culture shock. Do you feel alienated? I asked. I feel lonely, he replied, looking me straight in the eye, perhaps not autistic. In fact, for a stranger he just met, he was so comfortable he was almost high, probably not socially anxious either. Feeling lonely after moving is normal. Where are you from? I used to live at the bottom of the ocean. He smiled. Oh great, he's crazy. Can you elaborate? I asked. No, he shook his head. What does it matter where I came from? You people are too obsessed with knowing everything. When you say you people, do you mean women? No. He shook his head and I stifled an urge to roll my eyes. Humans, he replied. All of you are obsessed with questions and answers, like imagine a cockroach interrogating you about a mortgage loan. He actually shrugged and laughed and I laughed along. The image was too funny. It was silly enough to create magic, although another part of my head whispered, arrogant, do you feel the need to explain yourself to others? No, he laughed again, and this time I didn't laugh along. Do you feel people ask you to explain yourself? I'm bored, he said, and then sat upright, and I instinctively recoiled. My heart pounded. I almost laughed at my own fear. Why did I recoil? Did I think he was going to jump at me? God, I felt like I was in a zoo and all the bars had disappeared. Very bored and very lonely, he added. He didn't give me many clues to work with, did he? But I'm quite good at making something out of nothing. Why do you think seeing a psychiatrist will help? Oh, I don't want to see a psychiatrist. I said, gesturing around the room with my hand. Am I making you uncomfortable? Do you see it? I hate these kinds of games. Right now, you are seeing a psychiatrist, I told him. Why come here if not? I don't want to see a psychiatrist, he repeated. I want to see you. Oh, all right. I tried to think of something funny to say, almost by reflex. But I didn't think this was a good time to start giggling nervously or not. Why? I asked. It was the only word ready to escape my mouth. Because I'm bored and lonely, he said as if it were the most natural conclusion possible. Do you want a psychiatrist to pass the time? No, he shook his head. He didn't just look strange, did he? No, I had missed something. He was truly very unsettling. His skin looked fake, almost eerie. There was something completely wrong about him. He reminded me of a puppet or a mannequin. No, he repeated. I'm bored and lonely and I saw you on the street and I followed you here. The girl outside didn't want to let me in. She said you had a patient, so I thought I should be polite and wait. Then a man left the room and I tried to come in. That's when the girl told me I needed to make an appointment and a man next to me told me I had to wait my turn. He grabbed my arm. Then everything suddenly became less boring. See. He said, smiling as if he had proven something. I was right, wasn't I? I followed you and haven't spoken to you, but in less than a few hours I found 2 people. Found them for what? I asked. My heart was pounding in my chest. I shouldn't have joked so much. Did I miss something? A noise? Oh God, I hope Tracy is all right. There's an alarm button under her desk, and I hope she pressed it. Found 2 friends. His smile widened so much it started to turn red at the edges. Was his skin about to crack? I thought he actually could. I'm no longer bored or lonely. Both the man and the girl are interesting, but especially the girl, she's amazing. Did he just pat his stomach? Why did he do that? You have to go now, I stammered. I'm not smiling anymore, am I? I'm waiting and watching him like a sparrow facing a bobcat. He curled his lips, his entire face snapping back to normal like a rubber band, then considered my question. Did he just tilt his head? I think so. God, he moved like an animal. All right, he nodded. I don't usually do this, but whatever, you only live once. The way he said that, he emphasized the word you. I didn't like that. My head was spinning, but I couldn't lose my composure. Right now, I have to be here with a poker face and watch him go. I have to, because otherwise something could happen. I don't know what, but I have a deep bad feeling in my stomach that I am alone with this man. There's no next patient out there, and no Tracy. They're gone. Dead, probably. I don't know, but if I scream right now, the only person who will rush towards me is him. Please don't turn back. I tried to get the words out just as he left. I immediately regretted it because he turned back, grinned, and for a moment, I actually thought he was going to lunge at me. Why did he pat his stomach? But he just opened the door and left. He didn't even close the door. And for a long time, I told myself to get up and call Tracy. But instead, I opened my mouth and felt tears welling up. I sobbed. I cried so violently that my whole body shook and I pulled my knees to my chest. I wasn't quiet. I desperately wanted someone to come in. I thought I heard the elevator ding. Has he left? Please come in, Tracy. Please don't leave me alone. The longer I sat there and nothing happened, the more I accepted the nightmare feeling deep in my stomach. Something was wrong, Tracy wouldn't come. And that's when I heard the flies, only 1 or 2, but their buzzing was as clear as day. Fresh meat. Those words popped into my head like neon signs in utter darkness. It was the flies. Big, fat bluebottle flies with a deafening buzz echoing in my head like microphone feedback. They were attracted to something. They wanted something. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to go see. I took a moment to catch my breath. I didn't want to leave my chair, but I forced myself to stand up. I walked to the door with a cautious, "Hello," hoping Tracy would answer. But she didn't. And I stepped into the reception area and finally saw the rest of the secretary still sitting at her desk, her hands resting calmly on the keyboard. I recognized the red-painted acrylic nails, that blood matching the bright red of her wrist stumps. I couldn't help but wonder where the rest of her had gone, and why the only sign of the next patient was a faint, greasy stain on the carpet and something hanging from the light bulb. I spent the whole day answering questions. Usually I'm the one asking. Is that ironic? I always thought I had a good handle on irony, but right now my mind is dust. I think the police officer driving me home tried to talk to me once or twice. I couldn't open my mouth to answer. I don't like being that close to strangers. I could smell the dampness from his clothes and hair, and I only get rides from other people when something is wrong. He drove a different way to my house. And when we arrived, it took me a moment to recognize the building from this strange perspective. My car wasn't in the driveway. This was the house my neighbors glimpsed during the day. The building I leave every morning. Was the wall always that tall? It looks so big now, and there's something different. This isn't the same house I return to every night. My bedroom light is on. Is anyone home? The officer asked. He tried to sound calm, but I could feel the tension in his voice. He noticed the light too. No, I said. Can you go in and check? Of course, he replied with a smile. His crooked nose made me think of a postman. I don't know why, just a thought. I'll be right back. He tried to appear calm, but just before stepping onto the welcome mat, he checked his shoelaces, adjusted his cap slightly, and his hand dropped to his truncheon and radio on his belt in one fluid motion. Am I being paranoid? As he knocked on the door, I decided that, yes, I am being paranoid. I quickly unbuckled my seatbelt and got out of the car. As I started to run, I knew he heard the footsteps because he looked back, and for a moment he was startled. But then the fear dissipated, and he was pleased to see me. I realized I was holding out the key to him. How else would he get in? He took the key and quickly unlocked the door. He went in first, and I followed right behind. My house looked strangely empty. I don't know how to explain it other than feeling like the rain was trying and failing to keep quiet. It's just the storm, I told myself. To improve the gloomy mood, I turned on the lights while the officer checked around. Before I could flip the last switch, he was already in the kitchen, then the living room. He turned back. I didn't say anything as he looked at the stairs, and neither did he. We just smiled at each other before he went up while I patiently waited at the foot of the stairs. The sun hadn't set yet, but God, it was so dark. The top of the stairs was barely visible, it looked like a hole. I'm safe, I told myself. There was a muffled noise and I flinched. Perhaps just something falling, I thought. Time stretched as I turned back towards the living room. I saw the sun continuing to set, and now the opaque windows were catching the shadows of nearby trees. The way they lay on the filmed glass made them look like strange hands trying to force their way in. He moved so quickly through the downstairs. Why is it taking so long now? I hate this fear and anxiety. It's physically painful. This is why people walk into scary murder basements and call into the darkness. In real life, it's always the garbage falling over or a bird with wings making those strange sounds. Only in movies does Michael Myers slink out of the shadows. Now it's truly too long. I wanted to yell out and ask if he was okay. I should have at least heard him shuffling. There are only 3 rooms up there. It doesn't make sense. I should go up there. I should take the first step because in real life there's no murder basement full of monsters. And right here, right now, it's just my upstairs. It's just a place. It's where I'll sleep tonight, where I'll drink wine and watch Netflix and maybe half-heartedly swipe on Tinder. There was a noise, something from the kitchen. It was a gentle rumble, like the pipes when I turn on the faucet. Except it couldn't be, but sometimes I hear that sound if I fill the bathtub and go downstairs for a bottle of wine. Surely that's it. Someone is running a bath. I should leave. I figured it out, something is wrong. But for some reason, now is when my legs decided to work. I climbed the first step and felt something rise inside. It was anger at being scared. Whatever was up there, I needed to prove it didn't exist. This afternoon was a special case. A madman, a monster. Nothing to worry about, but deep inside I heard a voice screaming, "Go back, go, go." The math didn't add up. I reached the top of the stairs. I could clearly hear the water running. Someone was drawing a bath for me. Wait, why would I think that? Why would I think someone was drawing a bath for me? I pushed the bedroom door open and was greeted by the prone form of the officer. He lay completely still, naked and pale as a chicken in a supermarket. He looked almost peaceful, his hands by his sides, and next to him were neatly folded clothes. At the end of the room, I could hear someone in the bathroom. They were humming, and the rhythm of their voice was chillingly familiar. I have to go now. There's still time. The door was slightly ajar, but I don't think I've been discovered. The door swung open, I closed it. I tried to scream, but all that escaped was a crispy hiss. Even my throat constricted. It was him. He had come back for me. "I drew a bath for you," he said, gesturing to the room behind. For some reason, I replied, "Yes." I think I nodded, but maybe I was just trembling with terror. I wanted to mention the officer, but I couldn't admit it because if I did, what could make the madness collapse? "Come here," he said, and I obeyed. God, why? He seemed polite, didn't he? I didn't know what he wanted, did I? The only important thing right now was to survive because each time I looked at the man on the floor, his death became more ingrained in my mind. There was a dead man lying on my floor. Half an hour ago, he was a living human being, but now he was just cold cuts waiting. Now he was just a thing. I don't want to die. I walked to the man and he didn't touch me. He just nudged the door and it swung open to reveal the bathtub still filling. "Go in," he said. He wanted me to go in. I stepped up and dipped my finger into the water just to see if it was real. Not only was it real, but it was scalding hot, and I instinctively cried out. "Oh God!" My own voice made me feel like I had dropped a stack of plates next to a sleeping bear, but he just tilted his head like a dog. It took me a second to realize he wanted an explanation. "It's hot," I said, and from my own voice I must have been crying. He shrugged as if to say, "How would I know?" Then reached into the tub to pull the plug while turning on the cold water. He stood there watching the water, his back to me. "Is this when I should run? Would it be an option?" "I think it's fine now," he said, and my heart broke at the missed opportunity. If only I hadn't been so paralyzed with terror, maybe I would have had a chance to run away. But there was that voice again, "Don't turn your back on him." He wanted me to check the water, which meant getting closer to him. "Oh God, no, please no. I don't want to." He looked wrong, his eyes, face, and mouth were all wrong. It would have been better if it really was Michael Myers. Beneath that mask was just a man, an actor, but beneath that face was something else entirely. I tried not to look at him as I touched the water. It was cooler now, not ideal but okay for. He wanted me to go in. The thought rushed over me like a panic attack. Oh God, he wants me to climb in. I'm here and I'm completely alone and he wants me to bathe. Why? Why does he want that? Is this preparation? Oh, what do I do? He didn't say anything more, but he gestured towards the bathtub with a hint of impatience. And I found that indescribably terrifying. He's not human, he's an animal, a thing. What will he do if I make him angry? Tracy made him angry, and all that was left was 2 detached hands and a stain. I can't let that happen, I have to. I started unbuttoning my shirt. He didn't look at me with lust, but with great curiosity. This is wrong. All of it is wrong. Even as I peeled off my tights and hesitated before pulling down my underwear, I realized this wasn't what I thought. Something was missing, and somehow, that scared me even more than if he had leered at my naked body. They fell down, sliding past my ankles. I stepped out of them and used the momentum to keep going. If I stopped, I might pass out and never wake up. I was especially careful stepping into the bathtub. I didn't want to slip or struggle or even stop. I didn't want to give him an excuse to touch me. All this time, he just watched. He wasn't enjoying it, I thought. He just watched me like a dog watches traffic. Good, he said as I settled in. I was breathing so heavily that the water rippled with each exhale. I had to fight to suppress my sobs. While you bathe, he added, I will eat, then you can come out with me. Understand? I nodded. He nodded too. Then he walked out of the room, turning off the light as he went. I was left in the dark, with only the gray light from the bedroom filtering through the slightly ajar door, while I pulled my knees to my chest and watched my tears flow into the water. For a moment, I considered actually washing, but then I heard a sound like wood splitting, followed by a wet, squelching gobble. Oh God, that sound. Oh God, I know what that sound is. It's horrible. I could hear what he was doing, and I thought I was going to go insane. That's why he patted his stomach. He was groaning while eating. He was groaning, and this time it was like sexual pleasure. He was breaking and snapping and tearing and choking with the speed of an adult swallowing. Stretching, pulling, breaking, there's no escaping this. I couldn't see anything, but I knew he was eating the officer, and I was stuck in this bathtub while that thing gorged itself right outside my bedroom door. And when he was done, he would come in and gorge himself on me, and oh God, please let me die first. It felt like an eternity. And when the chewing and snapping finally stopped, the water was cold. There were a few seconds of silence, then he walked in, and I saw him completely clean. He should have been covered in blood. Maybe he wasn't. But then I caught a glimpse of the stain on the floor before he closed the door. There was no carpet for that mess to soak into. Just a puddle where a man used to be. Was that the joke? Oh God, I'm really going insane, but it's still true, isn't it? Just a few minutes ago, there was a 250-pound, crooked-nosed officer walking around, but now he's just caloric content. Was he eaten whole? Was his body crushed, mangled, pressed, and stuffed down the man's throat? I watched him stand there, his head turned away. He was observing me again. Should I start washing? Is that what he wants? He looks too normal, and I found that the most disturbing. No bulging belly or sagging waistline. I don't understand anything. Where did the officer go? The man saw me staring and quickly smiled before patting his stomach. It was too much. I passed out. When I woke up, I was on the sofa. I was lying down and I was dry and dressed. They were the clothes I had worn before, and my hair was still wet. I felt violated at the thought of him touching me. Somewhere behind me, he was moving, but I was afraid to turn around and look lest I attract his attention. I heard the sound of plates and I thought he was in the kitchen. Who cares? My door was only a few feet away. I thought I could make it, so I started to inch my leg. Maybe I'd have a chance to sneak out without him noticing. Eat again, he said, and I froze before one foot touched the floor. I snapped my head around in fear, and he was looking at me, his head tilted as if listening to my frantic heartbeat. His face was so neutral it looked stupid, and I wondered if there was a brain in that head, or was it lurking somewhere out of sight? I could almost imagine strings flying up to the rafters. Again, he repeated, and somehow he blended into those words a toxin that solidified my stomach and made acid rise to my throat without really knowing why I got up and walked into the kitchen. The dining table was set for one, and he gestured for me to sit in my place. I obeyed, pulling the chair in while he sat opposite me. I like you, he said, and I was once again stunned by his cold and indifferent tone. He didn't speak as comfort or as pride, but rather just as a novelty, as if he observed an unusual sign by the roadside. You will eat. Eat what? I wondered. There was nothing on my plate. I expected him to explain, to say something, but he stared at me for many seconds, completely silent. When he finally opened his mouth, no sound escaped. Instead, it just opened wide like rubber false teeth until something bulged against his lips. I was so horrified that I closed my eyes without thinking, only opening them when I heard a loud ripping sound and something large exploded from his mouth and onto the table with a wet, bloody plop and acid. It landed on my plate, and as I looked up from the severed torso sizzling on the tablecloth, I saw the man's face had returned to normal. He said, "I can't." I whispered desperately. "You can't fly or regrow what you've lost or walk on the sun," he said, "but you can eat." He waited a beat while I looked down at the body, covered in festering lesions, bones and organs visible through paper-thin skin. "Don't make me prove this truth to you. Eat more, you can eat." I wanted to dissociate right now. I wanted to have another out-of-body experience and imagine someone else doing these things. I don't want to know what I'm capable of. I don't want to have to do this, not step by step. I want to retreat deep into my subconscious. Even as he reached out and dipped his finger into the soft belly to pull out a strip of flesh, I still waited for my mind to go somewhere else, anywhere else. "Eat," he said, completely calmly, wiggling the piece of flesh to get my attention. "You're boring me." As I looked, I saw something moving behind him, and I realized it was his shadow. Except it didn't look like him at all. The outline alone conjured up a vague insanity. The dying brain's firing neurons as all color drained away, time stopped, and one by one, every light went out. He reached out and grasped my wrist, and his skin was like soft coral. He placed something in my clenched fist and then let go before sitting down. I knew what he wanted me to do, I just wasn't sure I actually could. I opened my hand and stared at it. It didn't even look human. It looked like rotting animal guts, and it smelled that way too, like something disemboweled from a kill. "Eat," he repeated, and I realized this was the last time. I didn't want to die. I opened my mouth. I threw the piece of flesh and muscle in and swallowed it whole, only for it to immediately come back up and slide onto my tongue. It tasted like battery acid with a putrid flavor, and it fell onto the napkin without a sound, quickly followed by a stream of viscous bile. When it finally ended, I lifted my tear-filled eyes to his face. He looked sad, almost disappointed. "I'm bored," something snapped. The knife he had placed next to me was long and serrated, and it was in my hand before I realized I had made a decision. Now I finally dissociated. Now I'm watching someone else step into my shoes and take over. And this woman, she took the blade and drew it across his wrist with such brutal force that I almost wanted to vomit. "Fuck you," she screamed. I screamed. "Is this boring?" I sobbed as I said the words, but the indomitable sound in her voice pleased me, and it didn't stop there. I stood up and ran before seeing the result. I've never felt this fast. I've never felt my heart pound like this or felt my muscles burn with such brutal purpose. I pray to God my body understands the gravity of the situation right now, because I couldn't conserve my strength. I was just a few steps from the front door. I had put all my hope on this gamble. The door needed to open. The room darkened. Something had cast a shadow over the entryway, and I knew I was about to die. I felt like time was slowing down, like any second. There was a loud knock on the door, and I crashed into the door with a thud, surprised I had made it. "Is anyone there?" someone said from the other side, and the shadow briefly flew away so that light shone down my back. I was gasping, my skin ice cold, and my entire scalp was so tight it felt like a rubber band ready to snap. "Are you there? Please let me in. I heard what happened at work today, and I don't think you should be alone. Are you okay? I can see you leaning against the door." I pushed the door open as fast as I could and fell forward into my sister's arms and into safety, or at least I hoped it was safety. Once outside, I found myself saying that it would be all right now, everything was safe and good. Her sweater was pressed against my face, and I hugged my sister so tightly it hurt. I never wanted to open my eyes again, but I knew better, so I pulled away and started limping down the garden path while she was still asking 1,000 questions. My mind was sluggish, and it took time to realize she wouldn't stop asking until I answered. "We have to go," I said. "What's wrong?" she asked. "God, what happened? Is everything all right?" I grabbed her wrist and started pulling, but only went a few meters before I slammed on the brakes, and my sister crashed straight into my back. I kept her balanced by clenching my elbow so tightly my knuckles were white, but she didn't cry out. We were both silent before the darkness that swallowed everything. The garden and the path leading out had never been this black. The only light came from my house, and it quickly faded before the malevolent shadow. The remaining breeze carried the smell of meat and filled my nostrils, a cold, metallic, hot, and damp stench against my trembling skin. "What the hell?" my sister whispered, her voice like scraping paper. There was something at the end of the gate, and it was eating the light like a black hole. But I felt I recognized it. I felt like the sun revolved to reveal a huge eye looking down at me with provocative disdain. Its weight was enough to crush my soul. My sister felt it too. Her face was like a startled rabbit, empty of reason, an empty vessel slowly filling with ancient impulses freeze or flee. She chose the latter without warning, and I screamed after her as she darted into the night. For a few seconds, only footsteps followed by a startled cry. I couldn't see her. I couldn't see her anywhere. It was like the sky opened up and swallowed her. But now the path was clear and I took it, running as fast as I could to the gate. I was soon out on the main road, suddenly realizing no one was out in this weather. The streetlights were trying to fight against the darkness but failing. They could only create small, lonely islands that I ran through in a panic. I kept thinking of something lurking in the gaps between each light, and without realizing it, I was holding my breath and closing my eyes. My feet were bare, and I think the soles were bleeding. I'm not sure. They were so cold I couldn't feel anything, and it was too dark to see. Only pain and too much to bear. Not just my feet, everything was too much, and I had to stop. A wall appeared, and I almost collapsed into it from exhaustion. Where am I? I vaguely recognized the street, but it looked different in the dark. Maybe he was gone, surely he would have caught me by now. Maybe he didn't know where I was. Maybe I had gone too far, I dared to look back. And I did, only to see the empty road. My house was no longer in sight, and I had never been so glad to be lost. There were only about a dozen lampposts lined up like increasingly small, angry soldiers. Then the furthest one exploded with a loud bang and the sound of shattering glass. Another one exploded, then another. One by one, the islands of light disappeared, and I felt him getting closer. Not just something crawling through my mind, but a raw physical feeling pulling at me and turning my muscles into flesh. Enough to spur me to move, and I looked towards the nearest house and limped towards the door. Grateful to see lights on in the window. And was that a woman? I pounded on the door so hard my knuckles ached, but I didn't stop until the door opened, and I almost punched the old man straight in the face. His wife was behind him, startled, and I rushed in, sobbing. The man looked threatened. I think he was still in survival mode. Was that a baseball bat? But the woman saw my condition and there was tenderness in her eyes. I babbled, and they listened. They locked the door at my suggestion and immediately led me into the living room while the woman ran into the kitchen to call the police. I wanted to look around, but all I paid attention to was the back door and the front door. Thinking that if he came through this door, I could run through that door. But then what? I can't just keep running while drinking this. The old woman came with a glass of water, and I took it, surprised to find I actually wanted to drink, and swallowed a gulp in one breath. I must be thirsty. The woman spoke again, and I flinched. I looked at her with blank eyes, and she repeated, "The police are on their way. What happened, dear?" "A man attacked me, killed my sister." Did the old man have a baseball bat? No, it was a drumstick. He was just holding it like a baseball bat. That made me uncomfortable thinking about what would happen if he had to try and use it. God, they don't really know, do they? No one knows, and they will never believe me. I answered them as best I could, trying to look them in the eye as I did so. I didn't want to confront this feeling. It was like shame, as if something happened, it was my fault. But it was, wasn't it? At least in some sense. That made me feel like garbage. Outside, something shattered and I stood up immediately, running towards the back door. While the couple called after me, they were scared too, but right now I didn't care. I put my hand on the back door, but my body froze as there was a knock on the front door. A loud noise, thumps spaced a little far apart. A fake knock for a fake man. "Hello, police here, let me in." It worked. The old man yelled something at me and turned towards the door. He said everything would be all right. I don't know. I was too busy with the doorknob and dealing with the realization that it was locked. "Where's the key?" I shrieked, my voice a high-pitched wail. I think the old woman replied, but it was just a comfort. Right now, her husband was at the door, pulling the chain. I didn't have time to find the key, but the stairs were between me and the entrance, so I ran towards them and fled upstairs where there were no lights. My foot hit the last step, and I was out of sight just as I heard the door open. Now I stopped running and started tiptoeing. From downstairs, I heard the old man's greeting cut short. Then there was no other sound, and I rushed to the nearest door, looking for a hiding place. I don't think this was the master bedroom. There was a small table with a sewing machine, old exercise equipment covered with white towels, and a double bed full of small pillows. I remembered the couple downstairs. I almost felt nauseous thinking of the old man swinging his stick as that thing descended on him and his wife. But I still advanced towards the large treadmill folded up in the corner of the room, hoping for a hiding place. It was big enough to cover me, and I slipped under the towel without making a noticeable difference. I thought. I held my breath and forced myself to be completely still, my chest almost exploding. Again, I thought this couldn't go on. Sooner or later, I would have to give up. He wouldn't stop following me. Even now, I could hear footsteps on the stairs. My body was shaking with tension that I didn't think I could suppress for much longer, but I didn't make a sound. Even as the door slid open, I could feel him looking at me through the towel on my back, and I felt utterly pathetic, like a child. Who was I fooling? I was about to throw off the towel and surrender when I heard him leave. I knew I wasn't imagining it. The door really did close, but I held my breath and stayed still. How much longer should I wait? It felt like too long. What if he left the house and I didn't hear him? My heart pounded like a drum. I could have easily missed it. I decided to leave my hiding place and look out the nearby window. I moved very quietly, creeping on all fours, the path illuminated only by moonlight. The worst thing that could happen right now was a loose floorboard, but I didn't dwell on that. A quick glance out the window showed a man walking past the house. I wondered if it was him, but I wasn't sure. There had been no sound from downstairs for a long time, but I felt a slight draft. It was possible the front door was still open. Oh God, I hope the old couple is okay, but I knew they probably weren't. It was probably him I had just seen after he left, finally full after tearing my life apart and eating every poor bastard along the way. I couldn't even bring myself to think about my sister. But for a moment, grief mingled with terror, and I slid to the floor. All relief mixed with the memory of the price I had paid for a few hours of tortured life. I can't be here. I decided if I left, I would do it so fast that even if he was still lurking in the shadows, there was a chance I would be able to run past and escape. If he had actually left, there was nothing to worry about. I could just run until I found another house, another safe place. I prepared to move towards the door and made sure to breathe deeply to get my lungs ready for the exertion. Before any doubt crept in, I crawled out silently and moved towards the stairs. I couldn't hear anything, but I couldn't see anything either. All I had to do was go downstairs and out the front door. Not far at all, I exploded into action like a runner on a track, throwing myself down the stairs 2 or 3 steps at a time. I felt energy surge inside, and for a few fleeting moments, the door appeared before me like the gates of heaven. But to my right in the darkness, something rustled and caught my eye. Only 5 or 6 steps left. I was halfway there, but I turned my head and lost my balance. One ankle twisted, the other slipped off the step, and I slid down the remaining steps on my heels. When I hit the bottom, I was deflated, unable to stand or react. I couldn't move my eyes. He was standing there, his jaw dislocated and eyes blank, looking more like a rubber suit than ever. The woman was caught between his leech-like jaws, folded in agony between dense sheets of muscle, dripping yellow fluid down her face. Her skin bled on contact. 1,000 dotted blood vessels bloomed from her pores. Her ankle was at her neck, the sole of her foot facing the wrong way. I didn't understand how, but she was still alive, and I was once again reminded of a dying animal in shock. She couldn't even look at me. She just stared into empty space. While the man's body swelled and powerful muscles squeezed her entire body with the audible crack of bones, there was a jolt, and she was pulled deeper inside. His lips curled around her head like a drawstring hood. Now she was trying to wiggle her legs, her eyes darting back and forth while her mouth hung open in horror. When it ended, she slid into his belly with a final breath, and I let out a terrible sob. He stood there for a few more seconds, trembling with excitement, until his eyes finally rolled back into their sockets from the unimaginable space in his head. I had given up trying to understand him, but I was starting to suspect he was larger on the inside than on the outside, and there was enough room in there for me and the others still left. He smiled thinly before turning to the open door. He seemed thoughtful. "This is a very strange place," he said. "Maybe for me, but maybe not for anyone. No one will eat with me, but you eat with each other, I see that, but no one will eat with me." He sounded almost sad. "Despite you all, I will continue to eat alone. I will go." He walked towards the door but stopped, and I realized I felt nothing, no relief or excitement or surging terror. I couldn't bring myself to believe this night would end with anything but utter horror. "Oh, that's right," he added as an afterthought, turning back to look at me. "It's here, I think, my death." You can have your sister back. It took them 3 days to stabilize her, and I was there the whole time. Sometimes I wonder if he gave the right person back. I imagine he probably couldn't tell us apart, or if he could, he didn't care. But then sometimes I catch a reflection in her eyes that makes me believe this is my sister. Even though her skeleton had shrunk to 2/3 of its original height, every strand of hair was singed, and her skin was as thin as transparent paper. She hasn't spoken, the police have questions, but I have no answers. At least they let me visit her. I love her, even though I never liked her. Besides, no one deserves a fate like this. They say they'll be able to graft most of the missing skin, but they're confused about the extent of everything that happened. So am I told them. She is impaired in every way. And as far as the neurologists can tell, her brain is full of almond-sized lesions. You can tell when she looks at you that there's nothing but a patchy network of thoughts and memories trying, but failing, to fire. I've worked with amnesia patients. They have the same look, but nothing compares to the sight of her skeleton rippling in her flesh. They have a word for it, but I don't remember. All it really means is her skeleton is as soft as cardboard, seemingly dissolved from the inside and leached of calcium. If you lift her elbow, her forearm bends like a plastic ruler. She should have died, they said, and I often fantasize about gathering enough courage to walk in here and finish the job. When she looks at me, I think that's what she's asking for. But I can't be sure because sometimes all I see is a shattered and crushed doll with a distorted and swollen head like something you'd find at the bottom of a garbage can. I can't read that kind of face. She has crossed some threshold that I hope is distant, but I still visit. Guilt is a powerful thing, and it's one of the few genuine emotions I can feel. That and exhaustion. When I do sleep, I dream of the ocean, and he's always there, somehow aware of me from an incalculable distance. I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. Ah,